aftermath of such a rebellion in Libya, which is just on the doorsteps of the European Union.
Absolutely. Carl Stanio-Navarro updating us with some key developments there in Malta, and obviously we'll keep you up to date with more news on that as soon as we get it. Well, in another development, the British Prime Minister has now arrived in Egypt, the first visit by a world leader to the country since President Hosni Mubarak stood down. David Cameron will hold talks with the country's new military leaders and is expected to urge the ruling Supreme Council to lift the emergency laws. He also mentioned the violence in Libya, calling it completely appalling and unacceptable, saying the regime was using the most vicious forms of repression against people who want progress for their country. Well, as Carl was mentioning a few moments ago, governments right across Europe are now urging their citizens to leave Libya as the violence there escalates. For more on this, I'm joined in the studio now by security analyst Will Geddes. Thanks for coming in, Will. It's all very well, isn't it, for governments to urge citizens to leave a place like Libya, but what are the procedures in place that go about getting nationals out of a country that's in turmoil?
Well, as you can imagine, it's a very complex and multi-stranded logistic exercise. Most governments will have an escalation process in their contingency planning and their evacuation plan. The plan will have to obviously account for who they know is actually in the country, and this could be dealing through obviously multinational companies who are registered with the embassy. But there is also going to be a large number of unaccounted individuals who could be travellers who are coming in just on short business trips, or may even be recreational tourists. The biggest problem that the FCO have, as do any other government, is obviously quantifying how many people there are and how they move them out of the country. And as I think we saw with Cairo, it was all a bit chaotic. Many people just simply headed to the airports, and the airports obviously, began to get exhausted of resources very quickly.
What about the cooperation then between, say, the Libyan authorities, and you're talking, of course, about the UK authorities? Is there much cooperation? Because we've seen earlier today both the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister of the UK condemning outright the Libyan government and the crackdown on the protesters. Does that then impede the cooperation between the two authorities on getting people out?
Well, yeah, there'll be two levels of play here. There will be obviously a formal statement that has to be issued by the Foreign Commonwealth Office as to its position on what the current events are, and also in terms of how our nationals have to be protected, likewise for any other country. However, there will be a second tier of information gathering that will be going on through the local embassy, and that will be to try and determine through their counterparts in the host country as to how situations are evolving, how they're developing, how they will be obviously managing the situation. Now, some of that information is going to be fairly spurious at best, so they can only advise as best as they can at their end on the ground as to what expatriates should be doing.
It was interesting speaking to Carl in Valletta a few moments ago about the fact that they had these two fighter jets appear with helicopters and possibly one passenger plane apparently not authorised to leave Libya. Presumably from government's perspective right across Europe, having these sort of sudden arrivals of different nationalities, say just into one place like Valletta, is going to cause huge problems, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, and this is a particularly worrying threshold. If we have sort of high-profile dignitaries, we're not sure of their nationality, but they're being escorted or hosted by Libyan carriers, and that is obviously military jets, into foreign countries. That's got to say something about what lack of control the government actually have on the situation, that they are actually evacuating their own high-profile individuals.
All right, must leave it there. Will Geddes, appreciate that. Thanks so much for coming in. Thank you. All right, you're up to date with the very latest from here in Europe, so time now to rejoin Doha.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news around the world. A suicide bomb blast in northern Afghanistan has killed at least 26 people. People were queuing for ID cards at a population registration office when the bomber detonated explosives. Another 36 people were wounded in Kunduz province. A drone strike in Pakistan's western tribal region has killed at least 7 people. Intelligence officials say at least 4 missiles were fired from unmanned US aircraft. They apparently targeted a training centre believed to be used by fighters in South Waziristan. It's the first report of a drone attack in the area for about 4 weeks. In India, the sole surviving gunman of the Mumbai attacks has lost his appeal against the death sentence. Mohammad Ajmal Amir Kasab is now expected to make a final appeal to India's Supreme Court. Kasab was found guilty of taking part in the attacks, which killed 166 people and injured more than 300. Here's our New Delhi correspondent, Pranav Suri.
It is going to take some more time before the death sentence against Mohammad Ajmal Kasab can be carried out, because under the Indian law, anybody who's been given the death sentence can take his or her appeal to the Supreme Court. That's the highest court in this country. In case the Supreme Court also upholds the death sentence, Mr. Kasab has another option of taking his mercy petition to the president of this country. Now, usually in the past, we've seen in such cases that it's a fairly long, drawn-out process. It takes many years before the case can come to any logical end. Mr. Kasab's defense team, of course, have been maintaining that their client is innocent, that he was merely manipulated by armed insurgent groups in Pakistan who asked him to carry out these attacks in India. But the judges at today's High Court in Maharashtra, they were quite clear. They used some very strong language in their judgment. They said that Mr. Kasab was personally responsible for the deaths of 7 people, including a top counter-terrorism official, and that this was not just any attack, but this was an attack on India's sovereignty. Mr. Kasab, who wasn't at the court proceedings at that time, he was actually watching all of this from his prison cell via video conference, didn't visibly react when the verdict was read out.
There's lots more to come from the world of sport after the break, embroiled in the deadly protests in Bahrain. Formula One fans waiting on a decision from the sports supremo Bernie Ecclestone. We'll have the latest on that. Plus, life also not so nice for some in the fast lane. All the spills and thrills from the Daytona 500 coming up.
Is with David.
Business Latest is brought to you by Catalum, the most efficient and environmentally friendly aluminium smelter. Business Latest is brought to you by Catalum, the most efficient and environmentally friendly aluminium smelter.
People talk about televising the revolution. It's tweeting the revolution, Facebooking the revolution, videotaping the revolution.
A new world driven by new media.
This is a very peculiar moment in media history.
Nobody can force me in 2011 to watch whatever I don't want to watch.
Analyzing the media's role in shaping modern history. The Listening Post, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. Farah's here with the sport, and the big question for Formula One fans is whether the Grand